Hi guys, my name's Niko. I sing and play guitar in a band called Now in Colour, and this week I bought an album called Images and Words by Dream Theater.
Light to dark, dark to light. Heaven must be more than this. With angels we can break the kiss. Sacred hearts won't take the pain, but man will never be the same. He stands before the window. He shares slowly fading from the world. And from an ivory tower hears a call. Let the lights surround you. Standing by the window, eyes upon the moon, hoping that the memory will leave her spirit soon. She shuts the doors and lights and lays her body on the bed, where images and words are running deep. She has too much pride to pull the sheets above her head, so quietly she lays and waits for sleep. She stares at the ceiling. There was no time for pain, no energy for anger. Sightlessness of hatred slips away. Walking through winter streets alone, he stops and takes a breath with confidence and self-control. I look at the world and see no understanding. I'm waiting to find some sense of strength. I'm begging you from the bottom of my heart to show me understanding. I need to live life like some people never will. So find me kindness, find me beauty, find me truth. When temptation brings me to my knees and I lay here drained of strength, show me kindness, show me beauty, show me truth. The way your heart sounds makes all the difference. It's what decides if you'll endure the pain that we all feel. The way your heart beats makes all the difference in learning to live. Here before me is my soul. I'm learning to live. I won't give up till I...
So Images and Words came out in 1992. It's Dream Theater's second studio album after their first, When Dream and Day Unite, came out in the late 80s. And this is very early on in Dream Theater's career. They're actually still going 26 years later now. And actually, their current singer, James Labrie, Images and Words was his first album with Dream Theater, and he's still with them now. So, you know, their first singer, Charlie Dominici, left after the first album, and they were looking for a new singer. And James Labrie was singing in some Canadian hair metal band or something like that at the time, and he sent in an audition tape, and you know, came down to work on this album with them, and I am so glad that he did. Now, if you haven't really listened to Dream Theater before, but you know what I'm like, you can probably guess that when I say that this album is like progressive rock or progressive metal, it's quite musically complicated. One of the reasons that I like it, and that it has had such a huge influence on me, was because as a guitar player, you know, I first saw John Petrucci playing a live solo from one of the Dream Theater songs, and it just absolutely blew my head off. I couldn't comprehend what I was experiencing, you know. And I still love John Petrucci now. He's still, you know, a huge influence on me, as he has been for so many other guitarists in this generation. But to me, one of the biggest reasons that I love this album in particular out of Dream Theater's records so much is I think that this album walks that really fine line between musical complexity and depth and interest, the kind of thing that you can dig into and listen to, you know, on really good speakers or headphones over and over again and get more and more out of it. It balances that side with a degree of commercial accessibility and just quality songwriting and consistency that I think very few other progressive rock or progressive metal bands have ever managed to achieve. And I think that's reflected in the fact that, you know, this is probably, or I think it actually still is their most commercially successful record. You know, Pull Me Under was the single off this album, and it actually charted quite well. And, you know, the clip got played on MTV and that kind of thing. And, you know, the idea of a long song, you know, the non-radio edit's like 7-8 minutes, something. I don't know. Someone will write in the comments, it's actually exactly this. But forgive me for not knowing exactly how long Pull Me Under is, but you know, that song charting and getting onto MTV was, I think at the time, a lot of people feeling like, oh, you know, the winds are shifting, you know, MTV is going to be playing really complex progressive metal, and, you know, pop is going to die for good kind of thing. Sorry, but, you know, that didn't quite happen. But I think going back to that, the reason that actually happened was that even though there are some very complicated things musically going on in this record, there's some very difficult instrumental parts, keyboard parts, drum parts, you know, the whole thing is very dense from a musical perspective from beginning to end. It's balanced with the fact that the songwriting feels like it was done with a real sense of care for the structure and the flow of the album as a whole. The tracks are very well placed, and there's only 8 of them, even though the album's like an hour long, 57 minutes or something. But they're placed in a way that I can't imagine them being in any other order. There is some really beautiful ballads and sort of softer dynamic instrumental parts and songs that give you a nice reprieve from like the kind of blazing technicality of the other parts. Wait for Sleep is the 7th track on the album, was composed by the keyboard player Kevin Moore. It's a beautiful keyboard part, and the song is just a really nicely written progressive ballad. And then what Dream Theater will often do, which they do on this record, is on Learning to Live, which is the last track, they'll bring back the main keyboard riff from Wait for Sleep, and they'll twist it around and they'll rework it into something else. And what you'll find is that themes appear on this record and then disappear and come back later. They resurface and they're reworked into something else. You know, songs aren't just a standalone thing by themselves. In addition to that, the way that the tracks are divided up isn't necessarily into just one song at a time. Like a lot of the songs feel like they have a number of small parts within them that are quite distinct from each other. And it just means that like this is the kind of album that you can sit down and listen to, or at least I can sit down and listen to this record without really doing anything else and just concentrate on the music. And there's enough interest there that it can keep me engaged for basically the whole time. To have a little bit more of a look into the musicality of things, if you haven't heard of Dream Theater before, one of the biggest things about this band was that at the time when this record came out, the band already felt like a supergroup, even though they hadn't been in other famous bands before. And one of the reasons for that was that basically every member of the group was considered to be at or very close to the absolute cutting edge in terms of the skill at their instrument. You know, Mike Portnoy and John Petrucci are probably a little bit more in that vein than the other members were. In terms of Mike Portnoy's been just an incredibly influential drummer, and John Petrucci, you know, is one of the most famous guitarists of the 21st century. But even the other members, you know, Kevin Moore, keyboards, John Mayong on bass, and James Labrie singing, they are all so technically good that it feels like, you know, a lightning strike of musical skill to have all these people in the same band together. It really is amazing. And one of the things that Images and Words does so successfully is, even though each of the parts that the individual members are playing have some serious complexity in them, the arrangements are designed with such care that they all fit together like a really complex jigsaw puzzle. I can't think of a better analogy, but they don't get in each other's way. They don't step on each other's toes, which I find is a pet peeve that I have with a lot of modern progressive music, that the instrumentation is so difficult and complicated on every instrument simultaneously that it ends up being just like this kind of overwhelming like wall of just notes. So I think they pull that off extremely well. I think this album is also a landmark in terms of James Labrie's singing. Like, the guy gets a lot of criticism now. I mean, given he's been doing this for, 30 plus years more on the road, doing these insane, vocal acrobatics, however much they tour 10 months out of the year or whatever. But at the time, and for years afterwards, this album really is a fantastic singer at the absolute height of his powers. It is like... God, in Learning to Live, there's this part, you'll know it when you hear it. It's like there's a whoa part going up to this. He hits this top F sharp, and as a singer, the first time I heard that, I just started laughing because I couldn't react in any other way. It was just so ridiculous. And this album is full of those kind of moments. Like, you'll hear bits in John Petrucci's guitar solo in From Under a Glass Moon. John Mayung's got this crazy bass solo in Metropolis, and the album is full of little bits like that, where if you're a musician, you'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe that people were doing this in 1992 kind of thing, and all of them in the same band at the same time. So yeah, I think this is a fantastic entry point into Dream Theater's music. For me, it was neck and neck between this and Scenes from a Memory, which, funnily enough, is actually Metropolis Part 2. It's a sequel to, the whole album is a sequel to a song on this record. So if you start with this and then you go Scenes from a Memory, I think between the two of those, you'll get a good idea of the best, not the best, it's hard to explain. What I feel is, I always say that. I don't want to say that this music's better than this music, because that's not what it's about. But I feel you have a really good idea of what Dream Theater sort of stand for musically, and then you can expand, down They have heavier stuff like Train of Thought and Systematic Chaos, and they have much lighter stuff and more proggy stuff as well. So this is a great starting point for Dream Theater. If you've never heard them before, you are in for a wild ride, I'm telling you. But this album is absolutely fantastic. It was just such a breath of fresh air out of the end of the whole 80s glam rock thing. It had really played out by this point, and these guys came in and gave that whole scene like a really fresh, musically sensitive twist. And yeah, this album has stayed with me and has influenced me so much as a musician. So go check it out.